The difficult part of the agent was not implementing the agent, it was thinking about the agent. How do I break down the process into tools? Now, if I spend around an hour a day doing repetitive work, which could be reviewing documents and giving the same repetitive comments over several documents, even agent could save me an hour a day. I could use that hour gained into other areas that allows me to be more impactful, maybe have more customer calls or speak to more customers to understand their problem. So that's how I'm looking at the impact. How many percentage of my current repetitive task, manual task, can I begin to automate that can free me off the relief to be able to then provide impact and value where I'm most needed?
That's Richmond Alake, developer advocate at MongoDB, and he's going to take us through AI agents, how to create them, how to, more importantly, to plan them, going through the process, measuring impact with 2 use cases that take you step by step. So lean in, listen.
The difficult part of the agent was not implementing the agent, it was thinking about the agent. How do I break down the process into tools? And I think that's what a lot of developers are going to be faced with when they meet their managers or their leadership team telling them to build Gen AI application is, what existing processes do you have and what can be agentified? Because not everything needs to be agentified. Humans still need to remain in the loop. There's some workflows where humans are required to be able to get the best outcomes, and there's some you can't just replace with agents. So as a developer, you have to be able to identify these things, think about these things before you start writing lines of code. I was able to do this because I had some time to think, but also talking with very intelligent people in MongoDB. We have these conversations on a day-to-day basis. We're playing around, experimenting with code, and we're talking to customers. I have several customer calls. I'm hearing what they're doing and what problems they're facing or their processes, and we're hyper focused on enabling them with both technology and knowledge to be able to be successful.
You start with the customer. What are they telling you in the agent space that they want, that's missing, or that's the promise of AI agents?
Yeah, so we'll take it a bit further back in what the customers currently are saying is, firstly, how do I identify use cases that I can apply agents to? That's the first thing, right?
Right.
If essentially agents are, they're tools, right? But where can you apply this agent capabilities to? So the first thing is, when we're talking to customers, is identifying the processes that, or what I tell customers is, you look at your manual processes, right? Or the processes within your day to day. You essentially, what you want to do is just lay them out, understand the process and the humans that are involved or the systems that are involved. And step by step, you want to be taking this out and automating them with agents. Now, the key thing about agents is you can start taking each of these processes once you've laid them out and turning them into tools that the agents can use. So if you understand your process very well, you'll be able to
Mhm.
understand how to formulate a tool definition that allows an agent to essentially replicate your workflow. So this is something I did for my one of the processes I go through, just to give some context. So as a developer advocate, I review a bunch of technical articles from authors or from my peers. And when I say review, what we do is an editorial review, and we do a technical review where we look at code. So I wanted to understand the agent space. But before I start building agents to replace others, why don't I replace myself first? So I look at the process, the technical review process that I go through, and I laid it out like a flow chart. And I just thought to myself, okay, which of these steps in this processes can I agentify? Can I turn into tools that I can put within an agent and allow the agent to then take actions and give me the end result? So that led me to exploring the space of LangChain and building agents with memory to be able to learn from past experiences. And that's where MongoDB comes in. MongoDB is a very important aspect for agents being the memory provider, because that's how you get these agents to be reliable and
Right.
predictable. So if I go back to replacing myself, essentially, what I was able to build within a few hours of implementation was an agent
Mm-hmm.
that you can give a Google Docs link of an
Mm-hmm.
article, and it will be able to go through the content of the link and conduct a review and leave changes as comments for writers to come and see and make improvement on, which is what I do. Now I've just replaced myself with an agent. So it helped me understand this process of, one, how do I identify agentic use cases? Two, how do I identify what operations I can actually agentify? And three, how do I start to build tools that I can give to the agents to be successful? And this learning is something that at the moment I'm compiling together, and I'm getting ready to communicate in the usual way, which is notebooks, talking about it in talks or podcasts, or doing articles. So again, the best that is how the agentic space is sort of playing out for myself and also for the customers as well.
How do we define what the agent actually does within a context so it does exactly what we want to do?
An agent has three main components, right? A brain, tool use, and also perception. So I normally think of the acronym, the mnemonic becoming a person. So the B is the brain, the A is action, which is tool use, then the P is perception. You don't need as much prompts to be able to steer the GPT-4 Omni into a certain role. You don't need to give it paragraphs of what it should do. With a few well-engineered, structured lines of simple language, just stating what you need, it can begin to behave the way you want it. Then you put in memory, you give it the capabilities to be able to reflect on past actions and then use that to inform the next or the current operation of the agent, then it becomes more stable. And memory, by memory, I mean bringing in a memory provider like MongoDB, where it can
Mm-hmm.
provide you with different memory capabilities to be able to enable the agent to reflect back on previous experiences and draw from a knowledge base. Before you start building agents, it's just understand what you're building the agent for, as in understand your process. So I was able to say, here is a link to a Google Doc. Do the steps, and I was able to say that in 3 line, and I was able to do what it was able to do what its objective was because I understood my process, broke it down into different tools, and was able to create a very efficient prompt for the agent to use to steer its actions.
So can you walk us through the different tool types you use and how they work together? You I wrote them down: authenticate, get document, find text range,
Yeah,
suggest edit, insert comment. Just so people watch his video, it's really great. But to you.
yeah. Those are essentially the tools. So essentially what the agent does is the first thing is authenticate. So I created a tool called authenticate, and I told the agent,
Mm-hmm.
remember to authenticate yourself first, because I noticed for some reason the agent didn't always authenticate first. So I had to specifically tell it authenticate first. So experimenting
Hmm.
with these agents, because we're still breaking new ground here. So
Yeah.
that was the first tool. The second tool is after you authenticate, here is a link to a Google Doc. Read the content of the Google Doc document. So that was the second tool that I built. The capability for the agent to consume, to get as input a link and then consume the content of the link. Then I created another tool called insert comment, which will then do the inserting of comment based on whatever input the agent gets. The agent feeds into that tool. And again, those are things that I do, right?
Right.
As a reviewer, I get a link to a Google Docs. I look at the link. I log in. I sign into Google. I access the Google Docs. I go to the link. I look at the whatever is on the page. Then I start leaving comments because I understand my process. I can agentify the process. I can then understand how to compose and build out these tools. And that's all. I don't want to say that's all there is to it, but that's all there is to it.
Well, I mean, it's a simple example, and that's why I wanted to share it because it's obviously got a beginning, middle, and end that's easier to digest than maybe something deeper where we get into many rabbit holes and
Yeah,
many
it,
variables.
it's. I see a lot of people trying to do some really crazy stuff with agents, right? But there are some low hanging fruits, as in there's millions of people that use a Google Doc, and
Right.
you can simply change the prompt and apply the agent to any use case because everyone use Google Docs and people leave comments on Google Docs. So that's a very simple low hanging fruit. Then you can just take that, apply it to Google Sheets. Now you're in the finance industry. Apply it to Google Slides. You're in the presentation. You're in public speaking. So all of these things, eventually you start to compound on all of these capabilities of your agent, and you can then understand how to create value for the customer. But one thing is then bringing it all back to what we do at MongoDB is identifying where the space can be in 6 months time, which is why I mentioned that is part of my role, is to be able to be forward thinking. Okay, we know
Yeah.
agents is coming. What are the use cases, right? Rather than the crazy stuff, what are the low hanging fruits? I've identified that. I've done the work. I'm able to then communicate that either in video or in code or in a course. So I'll be releasing the code to the Google Doc agent, which I'm sure loads of developers are gonna love. So what's the strategy in communicating that and helping my customers who are developers be successful when they're thinking about agents and building agents? And that is essentially, it all comes back into, in a full circle, into what I do on a day-to-day basis.
The importance of memory to an agent, both short-term memory and long-term memory. What do you see that in terms? Because I know you pointed out specifically long-term memory in the case you were doing. Why is that important, and how can people actually sort of consider that before going in?
Yeah. So if we look at agents, or even before we get to agents, let's look at ourselves as humans.
Right.
Our ability to essentially recall previous events informs our current or next action. It allows us to know how to be safe because maybe you ate a fruit and you got a very bad stomach, you got a runny stomach, then you know not to eat the fruit again because you're able to recall, right? So
Right.
you can take that concept of memory being able to inform an agent's actions, you could bring that into agentic systems. So, for example, what we have is chat interfaces. You give it a certain prompt and it responds to you, but it had no context as to maybe who you are or what you did. But now with applications or architecture such as RAG, you're able to bring your own domain specific data into foundation models, this large language models. So that's where you use MongoDB as a vector database. But it goes a bit further than that when you're entering the
Right.
world of agents because you just don't need a vector database. A vector database for agents would be the knowledge source. So that would
Okay.
be the a form of long-term memory. But you can also use MongoDB for short-term memory when you're looking at things such as semantic caching, which is you don't want to be
Hmm.
making a call to OpenAI or whatever LLM API you're using for similar queries. You can always store a response to a similar query and use that when a similar query is asked again. That's a form of short-term memory. And there are other things that you can start to play with, which is components of memory and how you start ranking them. So with humans,
Hmm.
we have several aspects of our lives that are stored in our brain, but we don't recall every single aspect of our lives before we take an action. We have a way, some method of ranking and organizing our memory and then
Yeah.
recalling it for certain action. You can bring that into agents as well. And with MongoDB, you can start to experiment and formulate. What I'm doing anyway is formulate
Hmm.
an algorithm or logic within the database layer where you look at the importance of a memory component, the
Hmm.
relevancy or the recency of it as well. So with MongoDB, you can capture all of these characteristics as data points and you store them within each memory or each memory component you store within the database. And then you allow the database to start to formulate a score, a memory score of
Hmm.
each aspect of memory the agent has access to. Now, when you're doing some form of knowledge retrieval, now you have a score that the memory can use to determine which one is more relevant or more important for a certain use case or a certain scenario. So this is something I'm experimenting with.
Yeah.
And this is all the capabilities you have when you start to bring in memory into agents. You start to create more robust, reliable, and then efficient agents when you start to bring in memory. And this is only gonna, this space is only gonna blow up. I think from now on.
But your AI agent researcher idea project you're working on now, can you share a little bit about
Yeah.
how it's theoretically how you're looking at that problem?
But the AI researcher was an interesting use case. And again, is something that I find myself doing as someone that operates within the AI domain. I thought, wouldn't it be an interesting exercise would be to create an agent where I can just give it some search terms, then it gets me a research paper or research papers based on those search terms, and I could then start to build out more tools for this agent. It was purely experimental, and I was just looking at my process again. What are my workflow,
Yeah.
and what can I agentify within my workflow? And that aspect of it was searching through archive for research papers and specific key terms. So the way that agent works is very simple. It has a tool that allows it to search through the archive website, allows it to search for the repository of research papers, and it can search through either using the ID of the research paper or specific key terms. So if you use the ID, it will get you a specific research paper because you're
Right.
using the individual ID of the identification of that particular research paper. But if you use a search term, it will get you a bunch of research paper that matches the search term. And this allows you to start to do things such as um, just using a search term, you can start to get a list of research paper that matches a certain key term you're searching for. There's nothing special about that. Again, this is,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you could do that on Google now, right? You go to the
Yeah.
archive website, put in the search term, you get the result. But to be able to create an agent that can do this opens the doors for more use cases, such as now you have access to a bunch of research paper. You can begin to ask the agent to start choosing the best one for your certain use case if you've previously communicated a certain use case to the agent. This is where the memory part comes in. So in the code,
Right.
the agent has some form of conversational memory store where all the conversation it has with the human is stored in a MongoDB database, in a MongoDB collection. So, and then reference it for every single time you're running the agent. So you can begin to see, you can use your imagination here to see where you can take an agent that has reference of previous conversation and access to a bunch of research papers. So you can start to enable it to for specific use cases, for specific problem domains. So it's still something I'm experimenting with, but again, like I've always said, or I said in the video, is before you try to agentify other people's process, you should agentify yourself first, right? So it helps with my learning and how to speak about agents. When I look at my process, I look at what percentage of my role can I, or responsibilities can I begin to agentify. I would say maybe I'm 5% there, right? We have research
Yeah.
agentified, we have providing reviews for Google Docs agentified, so we can see how we can start making our way to 100% or 50% where I get freed up to be able to speak to customers and provide value where I'm most needed.
How do you actually evaluate the impacts and be able to do this, or do you just sort of go with it and then figure that out later?
Yeah. So one thing is, I would like to say that I have a very structured way of communicating or measuring the impact an agentic system I build or will build we have. But the real answer is I'm experimenting and I'm disrupting and I'm learning. So I don't have
Right.
a strategic way to measure the impact an agentic system can have yet. Maybe I will in a couple of months. But how I see it is from myself as a developer advocate, what percentage of my time is dedicated to a repetitive task? Now, if I spend around an hour a day doing repetitive work, which could be reviewing documents and giving the same repetitive comments over several documents, even agent could save me an hour a day. I could use that hour gained into other areas that allows me to be more impactful, maybe have more customer calls or speak to more customers to understand their problem. So that's how I'm looking at the impact. How many percentage of my current repetitive task, manual task, can I begin to automate that can free me off the relief to be able to then provide impact and value where I'm most needed. Right now, I use intelligent systems to track my health, my fitness. I use it to
Mm-hmm.
do work. I use it to learn. I use it to make sure I'm sleeping properly. The only thing I don't use it to do is maybe I don't use AI or any form of system for my eating, but I'm sure eventually there's going to be a massive the human an average human activity, daily life activity, is going to be enveloped in all of these AI systems. And the question is that for the better or is that for the worse? Well, the podcast is the AI Optimist Pod, and we are optimistic about it being for the betterment of humanity. So we can end that on a positive. We can end it on a positive note.